Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It's my great honor and privilege to welcome the Honorable Edward G. Rendell, Governor of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, to Almac. Many of you may remember when nearly 1 year ago today, Governor Rendell joined Sir Alan McClay, Chairman of the Almac Group, for the groundbreaking of Almac's North American headquarters, located just a few miles up the road in Souderton, Pennsylvania. As a beneficiary of critical state and local economic incentives, Almac is currently constructing this state-of-the-art 240,000 plus square foot facility set along 40 acres in Lower Salford Township. Upon completion in July 2010, the facility will enable us to better serve many of the world's leading pharmaceutical and biotechnology companies in bringing vital, life-saving drugs to market. Additionally, Almac's North American headquarters will bring a number of new jobs to the greater Philadelphia region, tapping the generous pipeline of talent that exists along the prominent Pennsylvania, New Jersey, and Delaware pharmaceutical corridor. We'd like to take this opportunity to thank Governor Rendell for his ongoing support of the company. In these challenging times, it's extremely gratifying to be part of a community that recognizes the vital importance of sustained economic development and local job creation to business success. It is for this reason that we are proud to call Pennsylvania home of Almac's new North American headquarters. And now, I'd like to introduce Dr. Janet Samuels, Superintendent of the Norristown Area School District, who's also here with us today and would like to say a few words about the importance of investing in education.
Thank you, Ms. Murphy, and good afternoon to everyone. It is indeed a pleasure to be here. There are more than 12 million people living in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, of which 22.4%, or slightly under 3 million children under the age of 18, are residents of the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. In 2006, the General Assembly and Governor Edward Rendell did something bold and courageous to support the school-age children in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Together, they signed Act 114, also known as the Costing Out Study, which was designed to determine the basic cost per student to provide all students with a quality education that allows them to meet state standards and assessments. This bold and courageous act provided a record level of funding that would provide all students, regardless of social economic status or geographic location, with an equal opportunity to succeed in school. It is a pleasure to have a governor that has taken a bold and courageous stand that addresses tough budget issues that tear at the very core of school districts, towns, and communities across the heartland of our great Commonwealth. It is a pleasure to have a governor that clearly understands that for every $1 billion that is cut, there will be a devastating and possibly irreversible impact, not just on education, but on property taxes, employment, and countless other state and local programs across the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. Through the course of his term, not only as governor, but during his many years of service, Governor Rendell has demonstrated dynamic leadership and an unwavering commitment not only to the 3 million school-age students under the age of 18, but to the 12 million citizens in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It is indeed a pleasure to have a bold and courageous leader in Governor Edward Rendell, who is committed to taking a stand and doing what's right for education. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Samuels. And now I'd like to turn over the podium to Governor Rendell.
Well, hello, everybody. The question is, thank you for that nice welcome. The question is, will you be applauding for me after it's done? Let me begin by thanking Dr. Samuels for being with us and making some points, which I'm going to reiterate in my remarks. I also, of course, want to thank Jim Murphy and the Almac folks for hosting us, number one, and for the confidence they've shown in Pennsylvania. For our media group, Almac is one of the most important manufacturers and suppliers of things that are necessary for the pharmaceutical industry throughout the world. And they're an impactful company. They're headquartered in Northern Ireland, and they are an extraordinarily effective company. They have two business divisions, and both of them are here in Pennsylvania. Almac Clinical Services right here in Montgomery County, and Almac Clinical Technologies in Bucks County. In 2007, Almac had to decide where they were going to put their United States headquarters and increased expansion in the number of jobs. Well, as you can imagine, a company as good as Almac, with the potential to create 262 new jobs with a potential 550 on top of that down the road, and of course the 495 Almac employees that were already here, Almac was sought after by a number of states. We rolled up our sleeves and decided that this Pennsylvania company, by way of Northern Ireland, wasn't going to leave. And we put together an incentive package of $12 million. Almac was investing $100 million in the project, so we were getting an 8-to-1 return on our money in addition to the jobs created. Well, the reason we're here is because the programs we used, the state used, to put together that $12 million package are programs that will be cut out if the budget passed by the Senate, which already is $1 billion short of balancing, and I'll talk about that in a little while, if that budget passed. Because that budget basically not only stripped $1 billion plus from education, but it eliminated a significant number of the economic development programs that we use to attract companies. It eliminated totally the Opportunity Grant Program, the infrastructure program. It cut in half our job training funds, things that we use to put together the package for Almac. To make a difference, well, let me quote your great chairman, Alan McClay, in describing why your company eventually chose Pennsylvania. Now, I won't be able to give you the same brogue that Mr. McClay would give you, but he said it, and I quote, "It was Pennsylvania's incentives that attracted us to open our North American business here in 1996. The new incentive package awarded to Almac in 2007 was the key in our decision to take the next big step and make the substantial investment currently underway in Lansdale. Chairman McClay said that Almac considered locating its North American headquarters in 3 other states, but in the end, those other states, and again I quote, could not rival the broad range of targeted funding available in Pennsylvania." And that's the good news. Bad news is, not for Almac, because Almac now is here, but we're going to be handicapped and stripped of our ability to continue to develop our economy if we let this no budget become law. Well, we're not going to let it become law for a lot of reasons. Now, for almost a year, as most of you know, our economy has struggled to deal with the pain caused by the most significant economic recession in this country since the Great Depression. The greed and need for instant gratification of the people who brought our financial system to its knees has hurt almost everyone in this state. Now, at kitchen tables all across the length and breadth of our Commonwealth, our families are forced to make heart-wrenching decisions. Can we afford to send our daughter to college next year? It's always been our dream that she'd be the first person in our family to go to college. But Dad has lost his job and Mom's hanging on, and we just don't know whether we can afford to realize our dream and hers. Families all over are cutting. They're cutting out luxuries, and yes, they're even cutting out necessities. But it's not enough. So it goes in our capital as well. Since revenues have fallen sharply, creating a gaping hole in the budget, we've cut and cut some more. And now we have to cut again. And one thing I want to assure you is we will make more cuts, because before we even think of raising revenue, we have to cut everything we can cut without taking away the heart and soul of what we do as a state: economic development, education, protection of older people and children, things like that. So, but what I will not allow as we continue to cut, and What I will not allow is politically expedient decisions that are essentially would strip our health and safety protections, put people out of work, or shortchange the future of our children. I will not make decisions in the long run just to avoid difficult decisions in the short run. And that's a very important concept. I want to just quickly review with you how we got in the position we've got today. Back in December, of course, you know, the recession hit. It really hit in September. Back in December, we were facing an $816 million revenue shortfall for the first 6 months of the fiscal year. So that extrapolated out to about a $1.6 billion shortfall for the year. So based on that, we made cuts. The first $500 million of cuts were made back in December. Well, as the winter progressed, the revenue shortfall grew and grew and grew. So when I delivered my budget address in February, I proposed another $1 billion in cuts. But that wasn't enough, and the revenue shortfall continued to grow. In February, we were looking at a $2.3 billion revenue shortfall. Now it looks like we're ending the fiscal year, and we'll end it in about 15 days, with a $3.2 billion revenue shortfall. And that makes it clear that we've got to cut some more, and we will cut some more. Tomorrow, I'm meeting with the cabinet and telling them that we have to make another $500 million, another $500 million in cuts. And I've gone through cuts suggested in the Senate budget that I talked about, and I think we can safely make, without eviscerating or putting in jeopardy any important service that's so vital, we can make another $500 million in cuts. That means we'll have made $2 billion in cuts. But I'm sad to say here today that cutting is not enough to plug the hole in the budget. Even the budget passed by the Senate, which, as I said, would take $1 billion plus out of education, would force us to eliminate 800 of our 6,500 state troopers. We'd have to lay off 800 troopers. Would force us to end in-home services, health services for senior citizens. Would cause us to take hundreds of seniors in nursing homes and put them out of the nursing homes. Would cause us to take thousands of kids off of the Children's Health Program. These are children of working parents who don't have health insurance, who are now covered by CHIP, but because of that budget, we'd have to take those kids off of health insurance. And we'd have to close 1/2 of our nationally renowned pre-kindergarten programs, pre-K counts. We'd have to close half of those centers around the state. But even if we did all of those things, their budget is now over $1 billion in deficit, out of balance. Why? Because they didn't account for the recent losses in revenue, because it turns out the federal government in stimulus gave us $200 million less than we anticipated on the Medicaid funds, because our refunds, every year there's a line in our budget for over $1 billion to refund money to taxpayers who've been paying estimated taxes. Well, this year, as you can imagine, because a lot of people have lost their jobs who estimated in the first couple of quarters, the refunds that we're going to have to pay literally exploded. We may have to pay another $250 million in refunds to the taxpayers. So already that budget is $1 billion out of whack. So if we did all of the difficult things which would eviscerate so much of what we do as a Commonwealth, we'd still be $1 billion short. So we have no alternative but to raise revenue. Now, I've tried as hard as I could, and you've heard me say on TV that I'm going to do everything I can to avoid a broad-based tax increase. When I proposed my budget in February, I also proposed 3 revenue enhancers, 3 new taxes. But they were the painless. No time in politics when you raise taxes is it totally painless. But these were tax increases that the public favored by over 70%. One, raising the cigarette tax 10 cents. Many states have raised it as much as $1 this year. 2, ending the anomaly of Pennsylvania being the only state in the union that doesn't tax cigars and smokeless tobacco. We don't do it. And when I got here and found that out, I said, that can't be true. You mean North Carolina, Virginia, Kentucky, Tennessee, all those tobacco states do tax it and we don't? Why? The only explanation I found was someone said, well, one of the leaders in the legislature is a cigar smoker. Not good enough. We've got to end that. Thirdly, I propose taxing the extraction of natural gas from the ground, or the ground that we own, and every other state in the union that has natural gas extraction, and we now have it big time because the Marcellus Shale exists more in Pennsylvania, under the ground in Pennsylvania, than any other state. So there's a mini gold rush going on. Every other state taxes the extraction. They're called severance taxes. So I propose those three revenues enhancers plus the $200 billion in cuts. And it's still not nearly enough. Now, you may be asking yourself at this time, what about the federal stimulus funds? Well, the good news is we did get money from the federal government in stimulus to help our budget. Without the stimulus funds, we'd have been $1 billion more in deficit this year and $1 billion more in deficit next year. And to give you an idea of how much we're in deficit, if we decide to raise no new revenues, and right now in Harrisburg, a lot of people in the legislature are saying no votes for any revenue enhancements. Well, if we do that, our budget deficit for the up-and-coming fiscal year that starts July 1 will be $2 billion. And that's after we've cut $1 billion out of education. We'll still have a budget deficit of $2 billion. For the next fiscal year, it'll grow to $5 billion. And for the fiscal year that begins July 1 in 2011, we will have a deficit of $10 billion. Those are impossible. It can't happen. It would cause a total collapse of everything that happens in this Commonwealth. So, unfortunately, we've got to go forward, and unfortunately, we've got to raise revenue. There's no ifs, ands, and buts about it. Now, I believe we've charted a course of raising revenue that will have the least possible impact on both people and business here in Pennsylvania. First off, we're not going to raise business taxes. I'm not going to raise one dime of business taxes. Since I've been governor, we've seen a reduction of almost $2 billion in business taxes. But we are going to suspend the last 3 years of the phase-out of the capital stock and franchise tax. There's something called the capital stock and franchise tax, and Governor Ridge proposed phasing it out over a course of more than a decade. And in my 6 years as governor, we phased it out according to schedule each year. It's down to 2.9%. It was way over 10% when we started. We're going to freeze that phase out. That doesn't mean we're raising taxes on business. No business will pay $1 more than they paid last year. They just won't have this reduction. And given the scope of this recession, business has to absorb some of the burden. Now that's very significant. That'll produce in the first fiscal year about $360 million of revenue. In the second fiscal year, $550, and in the third fiscal year, over $700 in revenue lost saved. But secondly, it's my intention to propose, and I did so today and notified the legislature, an increase in our state personal income tax. I know that that's tough to hear. I'm proposing taking our personal income tax, or state tax, from its current rate of 3.07%, which is the second lowest rate in the nation, and moving it to 3.57%. After that increase, we would be the third lowest state that has a personal income tax in the nation. Now, as I said about the freeze in the business tax phase-out, I am going to ask the legislature to, in both pieces of legislation, the legislation freezing the phase-out of the corporate stock and franchise tax, and in the legislation increasing the personal income tax, I'm going to ask that both of those things end in the year 2012. That in 2012, the phase-out of the business taxes will continue. And in 2012, your taxes, your personal income tax rate will go back from 3.57 to the original 3.07 that it exists this year. So, essentially, it's a 3-year tax increase. It's a 3-year tax increase. Why 3 years? Because we face significant budget deficits that I've told you about. And the third year because that's when the federal stimulus money goes away. We'll be missing at least $2 billion, and we need to hold it for the third year. But after that, we should return to normal growth. The economic prognosticators are predicting a slow return to normal growth. During my first 6 years as governor, growth was between 5 and 6%. Every time we grow, that's an additional $250 million of revenue. So 6% growth means revenue grew that year by $1.5 billion. So we're predicting, because we want to be conservative, zero growth for this year. There are some analysts, most of them are predicting actually a return to modest growth in September. But we're predicting flat growth for the year. For the next fiscal year, we're predicting 3% growth. And then for the third fiscal year, 5% growth as the economy begins to get back to where it was. But we need these tax increases and the freeze for at least 3 years. Sorry to tell you that. Nobody likes telling anybody that they're going to raise their taxes. But I want to put this tax increase in concrete terms. If you are, the median income in Pennsylvania is $48,000 a year. If you make $50,000, if you're a family making $50,000, you will pay $5, a little less actually than $5 a week in additional taxes. That's less than $1 a day. If you make $100,000, you'll pay about $10 a week in additional taxes. However, 4 out of 10 households in Pennsylvania won't pay any additional taxes at all. Why? Because your Commonwealth is one of the very few states in the Union that doesn't tax retirement income. So as a result, about 1 million senior citizen households that earn income from stocks, dividends, whatever, they pay no taxes, no income tax at all, and they won't even after the increase. And then secondly, we have a law that says if your family earns $32,000 or less, you don't pay any state income tax as well. So 4 out of 10 Pennsylvanians will pay no additional taxes at all. For the 6 out of 10 of us who will, there's even a break in there as well. Because if you itemize your federal tax return, state taxes are deductible on your federal income tax. So let's go back to the family that earns $100,000. I told you they pay $10 a week. Well, if they itemize, they get the federal deduction, and that drops to $8 a week. It drops about $80, $90 a year from the overall $500. And it ends in 3 years. Now, some of you may be cynical and skeptical about it ending. You may say to yourself, well, when do politicians ever raise a tax and then drop it down? Well, if you're skeptical and cynical, I understand why, but there's a history in Pennsylvania of doing just that. In 1983, Governor Thornburg, and in 1991, Governor Casey increased the personal state income tax in the face of a national recession, a recession that was nowhere as deep as the one we have, nowhere as deep. But in the law, they promised to roll back the tax to certain levels, the tax increase to certain levels, and they promised that they'd do it in a specified year. And in both cases, they lived up to their promise. The taxes were rolled back to the levels they said they were, and they were rolled back in the year that they promised. And I believe we can and should do just that with this tax increase and with the freeze on business taxes. So, it is hard for me or for any one of us to raise taxes on Pennsylvanians because Pennsylvanians didn't have anything to do with causing this crisis. It was a bunch of greedy Wall Street millionaires that did it. And yet, we have to ask people of Pennsylvania to sacrifice. Fortunately, the sacrifice isn't too great. I'm not minimizing it. And it is for 3 years only if the legislature follows my plan. And we're not just raising revenue. Remember, we've cut $2 billion. And if I sat down with anyone in this room and showed you those $2 billion worth of cuts, you'd say to me, Governor, you can't cut that. That's wrong. I mean, that's a needed program. Cut libraries? Oh, no, we need our libraries. You'd go down virtually every line that we cut and say, no, you shouldn't do that. There's less than, we cut over 400 lines. There are less than 20 of those cuts that I think should have been made regardless of the economic climate. But cut we have to, and raise revenue we have to. Now, I know that cynics will say, there goes Harrisburg again raising taxes, and we'll get criticized for it. But think of the alternative. If you think if we don't raise taxes, you're not going to pay more, you're mistaken. Because listen to the superintendent. If we cut over $1 billion, and it's actually $1.2 billion out of education, what will the Norristown School District be forced to do? Superintendents all over and school boards all over the state have told us, raise property taxes. And what a bad time to do that after the gaming money is just starting to take hold. 120,000 seniors, because of the gaming money, have seen their school property taxes totally eliminated. And now we'd be forced to raise property taxes. Now, for us in Harrisburg, they'd be forced to raise property taxes. That might be a good strategy. You wouldn't get mad at us. You'd get mad at the locals. But for us, that's the coward's way out. That's Major League passing the buck. It's no good to put the tax burden on overtaxed local school districts. It's no good to sacrifice and hurt education. So, I'm calling on our legislators today to put the next generation ahead of the next election. We can't just pass the buck. We can't let school districts be forced to raise your property taxes. We've got to do the right thing. And most of all, we've got to go through with this plan because Pennsylvania can't go backwards. We've come so far in the last 6 years. Think of the progress we've made in economic growth, renewable energy, environmental protection, health care for our seniors and our children, and education for our children. When the superintendent talked to you about some of the gains, listen to the statewide gains. In 6 years, 30% more of our children are proficient in both reading and math than they were before. Only 9 states in the national test, it's called the NAEP test, made significant improvement in both reading and math at the elementary school level. We were one of them. And 2 months ago, Education Week, which is the #1 education periodical in the country, rated the 50 states. Pennsylvania came in as the 10th best public education system in the country. But even better, we ranked 5th out of 50 states in recent achievement of the students on test scores and national tests, and 1st in the nation in recent achievement in early childhood grades. Why would we go back? It makes no sense. All over the Commonwealth, the signs of the progress we've made are obvious. Our schools are doing better. Our communities are more vibrant. Our economic base is more stable. We can't go back. We shouldn't go back. And I'm determined that we won't go back. Thanks for listening. I know it's not an easy message to absorb, but we're going to move through this as quickly as we can. We're going to make this tax increase temporary for 3 years. We're going to get our businesses back on track to the phase out of the capital stock and franchise in 3 years. And at the same time, we're going to continue to grow. We're going to continue to improve education because all of you know in Almac, education is the key to which place is going to have a vibrant economy. In the increasingly global competition that we're facing, how educated our workforce is, how knowledgeable they are, that's going to be the key to success. So we ought to stand fast for education, not only because it's a moral obligation we owe our children, and I believe it is. It's the right thing to do for our kids, but it's the smart thing to do for our state as well. So thank you all very, very, very much. I'm happy to answer questions from the press. For all your Almac employees who've been kidnapped here to be in the audience, you are excused, and I'll see the press in 1 or 2 minutes. So thank you all very, very much.